He did not expect the address to feel this heavy, but the moment his car slowed down, his chest tightened and his hands went cold, because this was not just a place on a map. It was the end of a road he once believed would lead to happiness, and now all he could see was dust, silence, and a small broken house standing alone like it had already given up on being seen. And he stayed inside the car for a long moment, breathing slowly, because stepping out meant facing a truth he had avoided for years, the truth that the woman he once loved, the woman who stood beside him when he had nothing, was now living here, forgotten by the world and erased from his powerful life. And when he finally stepped out, the sound of gravel under his shoes felt louder than it should, like it was accusing him with every step. And then he saw her, standing in the doorway, thinner, older, holding two small children close to her body as if the world itself was trying to steal them away. And in that moment, the air between them felt thick with things never said, with nights of silence, with courts and signatures and lies that were stronger than truth. And he wanted to speak, but his voice stayed trapped somewhere deep inside, because sadness does that. It makes strong men quiet, and proud men small. And while he stood there in a clean suit that cost more than this entire house, she looked at him with eyes that were tired, not angry, not dramatic, just deeply tired, the kind of tired that comes from surviving without help, without fairness, without mercy. And the children pressed closer to her, confused, scared, because even they could feel that this man carried a past that hurt their mother. And his heart sank lower when he noticed their clothes, worn and thin, their hands slightly dirty, not from play, but from a life that never had the luxury of rest. And suddenly the memories came back, not loudly, but slowly, like rain soaking into dry ground, memories of a younger woman smiling beside him, believing him, trusting him, before the world turned him into something powerful and cruel, and before she became something inconvenient to erase. And the reason she was erased was standing far away in another city, untouchable, rich, smiling on television, the man who had once shaken his hand and then quietly destroyed his family through influence, lawyers, and lies, a man who took everything because he could, because power listens only to itself. And as those thoughts burned inside him, he realized how helpless this moment truly was, because no amount of money could undo time, and no apology could feed children who had learned to sleep hungry. And no words could erase the humiliation she endured when she was thrown out of a life she helped build. And she said nothing. She did not ask for help. She did not cry, because helplessness teaches people that asking changes nothing, and that silence is safer than hope. And that silence hurt him more than any scream ever could, because it meant she expected nothing from him anymore. And as the wind passed between them, carrying dust and old pain, he understood that this was not a meeting, this was a reckoning, slow, quiet, and unforgiving. And while the powerful man who caused all this sat comfortably somewhere else, untouched by consequence, the real cost of his cruelty was standing right in front of him, wrapped in fear, exhaustion, and quiet dignity. And for the first time in years, the millionaire felt truly poor, not in money, but in courage, because at that moment, he did not yet know what to do, only that walking away again would be the final injustice, and staying would mean facing a truth that no amount of power could silence. He did not move closer at first, he stayed where he was, because rushing would only reopen wounds that never healed properly. And she noticed that too, the way he kept his distance, the way his eyes lowered slightly, not in weakness, but in respect mixed with shame, and that small detail planted the first quiet seed of hope inside her, not the loud kind that promises miracles, but the careful kind that waits before breathing. And the children watched him closely, unsure if this man was danger or help, and that uncertainty hurt him more than anger ever could. So he spoke softly, slowly, choosing every word as if it could break something fragile. And he asked how she was, not as a millionaire, not as a man with power, but as someone who already knew the answer and still needed to hear it. And she replied with a simple nod, because explaining pain to someone who once left feels pointless. And yet she did not close the door. She did not turn away. And that was patience speaking, patience learned through years of surviving without expecting rescue. And time seemed to slow as they stood there, the machine behind him silent now, like even it was waiting to see what would happen next. And he noticed the house more carefully, the cracks in the wood, the thin roof, the way everything looked temporary, like it could be taken away at any moment. And something inside him shifted, not dramatically, not like a movie, but quietly, like a decision forming without words. And he asked if he could sit for a moment, not inside, just nearby. And she hesitated, then nodded again, because patience had taught her that refusing costs energy she no longer had, and as they sat, the children slowly relaxed, one of them leaning slightly forward, curious, hopeful without knowing why, and he realized that hope does not arrive loudly, it arrives carefully, testing the ground before stepping fully. And he listened as she spoke a little more, about work that barely paid, about days when food ran low, about nights when fear was louder than sleep. And he did not interrupt, because hope grows when someone finally listens without trying to fix everything at once. And far away, the man who once destroyed this family continued his life untouched, still powerful, still admired, still beyond reach, and that injustice burned quietly in his chest. But he understood now that rushing toward revenge would only repeat old mistakes, so instead he chose patience, the kind that waits, observes, plans, and protects. And when he finally stood up to leave, he did not promise anything, no money, no rescue, no dramatic return, because false hope is cruelty in disguise, and instead he said something simple, something honest, that he would come back, not tomorrow, not with answers, but with time. And she watched him walk away, unsure whether to believe him, yet unable to ignore the calm warmth that stayed behind, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think, just for a second, that maybe this story was not finished yet, and that thought, fragile and quiet, was enough to carry her through another night. Days passed without noise or announcements, and that was intentional, because real change rarely arrives with drama, it arrives through consistency, and he returned just as he said he would, not with cameras, not with gifts, but with presence, and that alone began to shift something inside her, because patience recognizes patience, and each visit became a little longer, a little warmer, and the children slowly stopped hiding behind her legs, their fear replaced by cautious curiosity, and he listened more than he spoke, learning their routines, their struggles, their silences, and through those quiet hours, he understood the full weight of what had been taken from them, not just comfort, but dignity, and still he waited, because acting too fast would alert the very power that once crushed them, the arrogant man who believed himself untouchable, whose influence reached courts, companies, and reputations, a man who smiled confidently because no one ever challenged him openly, and the millionaire knew that justice rushed as justice denied, so he moved carefully, rebuilding trust here while preparing truth elsewhere, and she noticed the change in herself too, the way she slept a little deeper, the way her shoulders dropped slightly, because patience shared becomes strength, and one evening, as the sun fell low and painted the broken house in soft gold, he finally spoke about the past, not to defend himself, but to admit his failure, and she did not forgive him instantly, because forgiveness is not a switch, it is a process, but she allowed him to stay, to help quietly, to fix small things without making promises, and somewhere far away, the powerful antagonist began to feel small disturbances, documents resurfacing, questions being asked, alliances shifting subtly, nothing loud, nothing traceable, just the slow tightening of consequences, and while that man still believed himself safe, patience was doing what anger never could, building a path toward truth, and in that space between waiting and action, hope finally learned how to stand without fear, steady, quiet, and real. The moment justice arrived, it did not knock loudly, it entered quietly, like everything else that truly mattered in this story, because while the powerful man was still laughing in boardrooms and shaking hands on stages, the ground beneath him had already shifted, and one morning the calls stopped being friendly, the doors stopped opening easily, and questions he had buried years ago returned with calm precision, documents, witnesses, timelines, all moving together without noise, and by the time the truth reached the surface, there was no speech dramatic enough to save him, no influence strong enough to silence what patience had carefully uncovered, and far away from that collapse, in a small house that no longer felt temporary, she stood watching her children sleep peacefully, something they had not done in years, and when the news finally reached her, she did not smile in victory, she simply closed her eyes and breathed, because justice did not feel like revenge, it felt like relief, and he stood beside her, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as someone who stayed long enough to earn his place, and for the first time since humiliation took everything from her, the world felt fair enough to trust again, and he did not announce his actions, he did not claim credit, because true justice does not need witnesses, it only needs balance, and as days passed, life slowly rebuilt itself, not into luxury, but into stability, dignity, and choice, and the children laughed freely now, unaware of how close they once were to being forgotten, and when she finally looked at him, not with pain, not with doubt, but with calm acceptance, he understood that the real shock was never what he did to his enemy, it was what he chose to become instead, a man who waited, endured, and corrected his silence with action, and in that quiet ending, where no one clapped and no one cheered, the story reached its true conclusion, because justice does not always roar, sometimes it simply allows broken lives to stand again, unafraid.